Good morning. Welcome to our panel this morning. Hopefully you can all hear me. Yeah, that's all good. Okay, so the subject of today's panel is the future energy network. What do we need to do to get to net zero? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to introduce my panel. We've got an hour. So first of all, the panel are going to tell you a little bit about themselves. Then I'm going to start with an introductory question. We've got about 20 minutes for discussion, and then we'll open up to questions from the floor. So if you start thinking of questions that you'd like to ask either one individual panelist or else the collective panel, please sort of have a think about that whilst we're discussing it. So in terms of the subject, we've decided to interpret it quite broadly. So as well as talking about the network, so clearly that's the future, it's the key enabler maybe of the future system, we also want to look at the assets that are connected to the system, so both the utility scale assets and also the distributed and consumer assets and how that all works together as a system. So we've got quite a broad scope, but we will try and give specific examples to make it all a bit tangible and not too abstract. So I'm delighted to bring you my panel. We've got a really interesting mix of different perspectives. So starting off, we've got Paul Ebert, who's a Group Director of Engineering Consultancy Worley. We've got Lokesh Vohra, who is a Senior Investment Manager at Ebert Infrastructure. So Lokesh is very much giving us the investment perspective. We've got Julie Taylor, who's a Commercial and Regulations Director at National Grid, so very much focused on pipe and wires and how we enable that future transition. We've got Mike Simpson, who has a different perspective, so he works for a long-duration energy storage provider called Cheesecake. Maybe we also have to dig into why it's called Cheesecake, that would be good. And then finally, we have Khan Yakamak, who is the chairman of Gurus Technology. So you have a very interesting perspective in that your group both develops renewable technology and also is very interested in the sort of digital space and the AI and how we sort of use that to accelerate the transition. So starting off with questions, Paul, so starting off with your perspective.
Okay.
So your company's based in Australia, as I understand. So very interested in how you see the transition in Great Britain compared to, the perspectives you have internationally. What are sort of the key challenges and opportunities that we have here?
Okay, so I don't know the UK system that well, but I can talk in general terms. A little bit about Worley. It's a 50,000 person organisation listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. We basically work in three areas: energy, chemicals and resources. We tend to gravitate to the heavy industries, and you don't have to have too much knowledge to realise that it's those industries that have some very big decarbonisation challenges. When we think about energy networks, our view has got a couple of dimensions. We don't just see that as, say, an electricity grid or an electricity network. We also see it as connectivity between energy supply and energy users in many forms. It can be electricity, but it can also be molecules. So we have a big business that works in energy feedstocks, into chemicals, things like fertiliser, a whole bunch of heavy industries. So we very much look at energy infrastructure, and we're doers. So we're at the doing end of the spectrum. We design, we consult, we deliver, and then we put infrastructure in the ground. Our position on net zero is that we have to move from the thoughts and the ideas and the policy to real action in infrastructure on the ground. The time has come where unless we start building the construct of decarbonisation, so the infrastructure, the rest is meaningless, because ultimately you have to realise the emission savings, otherwise it's just, no pun intended, a lot of hot air. So that's kind of our position.
So pace and scale is what you need.
Yeah, it's all, for us, it's all about how do you get that scale and pace. Last couple of years we've been doing some work with Princeton University on that very issue. They came to us after doing some very interesting work in America called Net Zero America, where they looked at the scale of infrastructure deployment needed to take the US economy to net zero. And they did something that very few people have done, and they mapped that in GIS systems. So the pipelines, the terminals, the bioenergy projects, the nuclear fleet. And what emerges out of that is something that's very scary to someone who looks at it from an infrastructure delivery perspective. And they said to us, "You're a gritty infrastructure deliverer, how would you do this?" And we think we actually need a paradigm change in the way we deliver infrastructure, and that became the From Ambition to Reality series that we've written with Princeton around that.
That's really interesting. So very much a systems approach. What is going to be the future systems need? How do we change the current system to go with that? I saw Julie nodding, so maybe we can pick up on that when I go to you. Right. Okay, Julie, so you next. So the whole energy network really comes down to the physical pipes and wires. Without that, we're not going to be able to get this 50 gigawatts of wind round to the consumers. I think Laura Sandys often calls this the consumer dividend, or the decarbonisation dividend. So unless we have the pipes and wires transported, consumers are not going to be able to benefit from that low cost power. What do you see as the key blockers? Because I know that grid want to move faster. What's stopping you?
Oh, thank you, Naomi. So a little bit about National Grid, and then I'll answer the question. So we're a global company. We work in the US and in the UK. I'll just talk about the UK today. So the UK runs the transmission system, so we move the electricity around in large quantities, and we also run part of the distribution system, Wales and the Midlands and down into the southwest. Our vision is to be at the heart of a clean, fair and affordable energy transition, and all those words matter to us. The clean one is the obvious one, but fair and affordable matters as well. In terms of, so I do agree with Paul, there needs to be a bit of a paradigm shift on infrastructure acceptance. And there are some really great things about being part of the energy networks industry at the moment, and then there are some things that are concerning. So I just start with the positive. We have, I think, an unprecedented amount of political commitment to making this happen. And over the last couple of years, and this was very notable in the climate change conference in Dubai, for instance, and in fact our energy department did a piece of work on this last summer, which we were part of. It's become very clear to everybody that the energy transition is going to be critically about building out the grid, as you say, Naomi. That is going to be the thing that is the limiting factor if we're not careful. Now, in the UK, the regulator Ofgem has already done quite a bit about this, so they've asked us last year to enter into the most significant amount of rebuilding of the grid in the UK that has been seen since the 1950s. So they asked us to do 17 mega projects of a value of roughly 15 to early teens billions. And we and the other transmission owners are in the process of doing that. That is only really enough to get us part way towards the goals, though. And we are able to deliver it, but it is being hampered, I think, by two key things that we do need some really global mobilisation on. The first is planning and community acceptance. So how do countries, regions, how do they decide which infrastructure they will have? How do governments promote to people the need for this infrastructure, and how do we make meaningful community benefits when we put that infrastructure in place? So that's one area where we are, with probably a new government coming in, we are looking to how can a government help us with those challenges. And then the second area, which is the area that I particularly worry about with my particular role in Grid, is that there's a global supply chain crunch. You know, every country in the world is trying to do this, and certain materials and certain high-value technologies are extremely constrained. And it's no good us all just rushing in and trying to be the first to secure a limited supply chain, right? We need the supply chain to expand, and that means not just products and materials, but it also means skills, which is another potentially rate-limiting factor in our view, and which we are passionately concerned about. And again, want to mobilise political action on that as well as industrial action.
Super, thank you, Julie. I actually forgot to introduce myself and I rushed to introduce the panel, so just to declare sort of my interest. So my name's Naomi Baker. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at Energy UK, which is the trade association for the energy sector. So our members represent 97% of retail, 80% of generation, good chunk of the sort of grid scale batteries that are out there, most of the existing long duration storage, for example. So we have a really diverse membership. And what we try and do is facilitate sort of constructive conversations about how we get future change in the system. So very much echo what Julie said there about the supply chain. Both supply chain and planning comes up time and time again in conversations with members. Whilst members can invest, there's lots of appetite to invest. What we can't do as industry is get over some of those barriers. So that's really where we need political support and political change. So yeah, 100% agree with you there, Julie. Okay, Lokesh, turning to you. So I think this follows on really nicely from what Julie was saying. You're bringing the investor perspective. How do you decide what to invest in? So I work particularly in the sort of flex space, so demand response, storage, both long and short. So we know that we're going to have when we have 50 gigawatts of wind on the system, it's going to be much peakier. For around 60% of the time, we will have surplus energy. So clearly that's an opportunity. But do we export it through the interconnectors? Do we move demand around so that consumers use it with their assets, their heat pumps and their electric vehicles? Do we use grid-scale batteries to mop it up and then cover those gaps, supply gaps? Do we have long-duration storage like Mike's technology? How do you decide, as an investor, where to put? There's also, of course, hydrogen generation, which will help us fill those gaps. CCUS. There's all these different technologies. Lots of which will be competing for these future roles. How do you decide what to invest in?
Thank you. That's a really good question. Maybe I can give a bit of background about Amber,
yes,
so that we're all on the same page. Amber Infrastructure is a fund manager, traditional core infrastructure investor, invests across energy, digital, and transport in the US, Eastern and Western Europe, as well as Australia, and manages about $14 billion worth of assets today. How do we decide? I think we are systematic about our approach. We do have a strategy, so sometimes the fund strategy and our LPs also mandate what we can and can't invest in. But let's take the constraints out. Say we just pick the energy transition and we forgo transport and digital for a moment. In the energy transition, we see opportunity across the spectrum. So, power production, electricity distribution, as well as, gas, for example, but green gas, not traditional gas. Picking an investment is about timing. So we analyze the market quite effectively, and we are now at the beginning of our journey in the energy transition. Even though we, I think, have 3 gigawatts of solar and few hundred megawatts of wind in our portfolio, I still think we're still at the beginning of our energy transition. And I say this because over the last 4 years, I've seen a shift in the mindset of our investment committee. There's a change in the risk appetite. There's an understanding that fundamentally infrastructure investors have to kind of move away from the traditional mindsets of fully contracted cash flows. They need to start taking merchant risk. We're still not quite there on taking technology risk. We like having insurance and downside protection. It's inherent to the asset class. And we're taking small steps. So for example, we've invested in battery storage in the UK. We're scouting opportunities in Germany and Italy. We're looking at green gas in Lithuania at the moment. We aren't cherry picking, but we are, I would say at the moment, more focused on the electrification side rather than the hydrogen side. Again, as a perspective of just timing more than anything else. So yeah, it's hard, and I think resonating some of the challenges that have been spoken about today, both from a planning process perspective as well as a supply chain perspective. These challenges are not just unique to the UK. They're in every European country that I'm working in at the moment. And I think we just price the risk in. So we factor in delays in planning, we factor in supply chain issues, and inherently what that leads to is a valuation gap between the vendor and ourselves. And then it comes down to negotiating that and communicating that effectively to figure out, we are a long-term strategic investor and a partner to many of IPPs or electricity distribution companies, and that's how we get over the line.
That's really interesting. So there was something in there about so investment needing to change in this sector about how you calculate risk, and so I thought that was very interesting. Also, there was something about maybe those technologies that are able to move faster might have an advantage in that it will be clearer to see those immediate revenues. So in terms of technologies fighting for investment, that sort of first mover or being able to mobilize more rapidly can be an advantage in the space.
Yes, I totally agree. And look, battery storage is like completely the front runner in that sector, right? It's scaled rapidly, costs have declined, it doesn't need as much government subsidy. The government has been very helpful in capital allowances, for example, through taxes, as well as through the capacity market. And I have to give it to the UK and the UK energy market. It has completely been a front runner in enabling battery storage, and most European countries are now following through.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting space. Thank you. Mike, moving over to you, could you tell us a little bit about the technology that Cheesecake provides, and also some of the spaces that you're looking to fill in the sort of future system, and any sort of quick sort of opportunities and blockers that you're finding at the moment?
Absolutely, with pleasure. Morning all. So my name's Mike Simpson, I'm Chief Commercial and Product Officer for Cheesecake. So we have developed a longer duration storage technology, and it's based on compressed air. So it's a little bit different in terms of the core technology. The way the technology works is we take electricity from the grid or from renewables, even better, and we use electric motors to drive piston air compressors. So those compressors are compressing air, and as it's compressed, it heats up, and we store that heat and we store the air as well. And we store those in pressure vessels and in our thermal store. When we want the electricity back, we run the process in reverse. So we take that air, we heat it up, and we put it back into the same piston machines and use it to drive the pistons, which turns the motor as a generator. So we're producing electricity, and that can be, it's typically for commercial and industrial applications. So we could be providing electricity for local microgrid, for electric vehicle charging, or for on-site use. This is a technology that was kind of driven by this longer duration need, where we see the mismatch between kind of the solar, between the wind and our demand, and looking to solve some of those problems without some of the side effects that we see for some battery technologies. So trying to be really sustainable. We use ex-service truck engines as the basis of our compressors, for example. So this is existing hardware that is having a second life in our system. And some of these kind of innovations feel like they're actually really powerful, not just in terms of their technology, but in terms of what they say, in terms of our approach, in terms of our mindset, in terms of what's possible. So it is possible to use stuff that we have around us, stuff that is familiar, in a new way to kind of unlock some of the energy transition that is in front of us. And a big part of that is it does feed into the supply chains, it feeds into the skills, the infrastructure we have, because the supply chain challenges are enormous. On the grid side, in terms of kind of the copper, in terms of the transformers and some of the long lead time items there, but also in terms of being able to keep costs down, to be able to work with companies that have been delivering diesel generators for many decades. Actually, this is a way for them to take part in the transition as well, because they already know how to put a piston machine onto a generator. Ours is much the same. So really interesting in terms of the supply chains and also the skills, which is something I think we're going to keep coming back to. The lead time on skills could sink us. If we haven't got the skills in place to be able to deliver this transition, we're all going to be treading water. So some really interesting kind of spaces to play into.
That's super interesting, and it kind of plays back to Lokesh's point about investment risk. If you're building on existing technology and existing skills and reducing some of those risks, that presumably helps there too.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's something that being able to speak to a kind of financing company, an insurance company that actually has financed CHP assets for many years, or on-site generation, that makes a huge difference. It really does.
Thank you. Khan, so moving to you. So your company spans quite a wide space. So would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what your company does? And I'm also very interested in your views about the sort of digital transformation side and your views on what AI, how that could help us with the speed and pace sort of challenge in the UK.
Sure, sure. So Gürüş is a Turkish conglomerate. We are in steel industry, one of the biggest metal shaping groups of Turkey. We have a construction group, which is a general contractor, where we do our own construction for our power plants nowadays. And we have a renewable energy site, which is now Turkey's one of the largest renewable energy company. We are one of the biggest in wind, if not the biggest. One of the first to get into geothermal in Turkey, and the most efficient geothermal power plant in Turkey is operated by us again. And it's also one of the most efficient in Europe. I'm a civil engineer, so basically we invested around $4.5 billion in Turkey, and we are power plants abroad. I'm a civil engineer. I'm third generation in the company. It's a family owned. I realized that we haven't digitalized many of our operations. That was the first thing that I realized. So I started with digitalizing certain operations in our company. Then I found some losses, revenue losses, tens of millions of dollars. So it helped us to accelerate into AI. And currently we are integrating our AI solutions in our own company to help us reduce human errors. So we are happy with that. I don't know if you're following the AI trend. Usually they are stating that 70% of your work time is unnecessary work, where 30% of your work is necessary. So some LLMs are shortening this time, so which is in benefit for us for work hours as well. So we're benefiting in that way. We use AI in many places. Production estimation, predictive maintenance. We have a drone inspection program for our blades. Now we are inspecting our blades regularly. So it's helping us a lot as an investor.
That's really interesting. I love that stat about 30% of your work time is actually valuable and 70% is probably chasing up emails, and
Yes.
it's probably right.
Yes.
That's fascinating, sort of more broadly though, about the role of AI in terms of driving a leaner system and how we can learn from that in the UK, particularly as our system gets more complex with more different technologies, more complex balancing challenges, and how to sort of maximize the opportunities from it.
Well, I don't come from an AI background, but I work with people who has like PhDs from MIT on computer science, and the most important part is to get the correct data set, right? For example, in certain of our power plants, we have defected goods, which was manufactured, by either European or American technology providers. It's important to put AI into these production lines initially. Then get the turbines on the site, work on the AI in construction to optimize the construction cost as well as the deliveries, right? And we can implement AIs in maybe grid, which she can talk about, right? I'm not on the grid side, but on the generation side, it is really valuable. We are minimizing human errors. For example, our downtime reaction time went 1/3. So we used to react to down turbines in 90 minutes. Now it's less than 30 minutes, and that 30 minutes is to get the turbine online. And so renewable energy is not like baseload power plants. Yeah. So in baseload power plants, you can put full power and it will generate. Right, 8,600 hours a year, so it will generate 8,000. But renewable energy is 1,500, 2,000 hours, right? 3 at most, maybe. So if you lose that wind or solar, you're done. You can't regenerate that cost. So downtime analysis and optimization in these is really valuable for both investor as well as the bank side as well.
Yeah, that's a really powerful illustration of the role of AI in the future system. I'm going to move us on, because one thing we've all talked about, and I think it came through in your initial questions, was this theme of fairness that we wanted to pick up. So, Mike, you brought it out nicely in terms of the supply chain and sort of transitioning skills to the new sector. I thought that was a nice illustration. But so the general question is, what does fairness in the transition mean to you? Who would like to kick off with that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. So I said it's in the middle of our vision statement, clean, fair and affordable. So I think we're thinking about fairness in a couple of different dimensions. I think there's the question of what energy can do for your economy and what it can do for consumers. And we want to make sure that we have done this in a way where the benefit to the end consumer is uppermost in our mind all the time, and the benefit to the economy is uppermost in our mind. Obviously, electricity is going to be a huge part of any future economic growth, particularly given the prevalence of digital and AI and data centres and the like. So we do want to make sure, as we do this, that we are very, very conscious of the economics of the situation, and that those who are least able to afford energy are able to afford it. And we do believe, by the way, that this transition will ultimately reduce the bill to the consumer. There may be some investment that's required to do that, but we can see a win-win where clean energy is actually cheaper energy as well. And then the second area goes back to what I was saying about communities. So we have, in doing this massive grid upgrade, which is called the Great Grid Upgrade, by the way, we are hoping to raise public awareness of why we need to do this, point one. Because at the moment, we turn up in a region and we say we want to build 200 kilometres of overhead line, and they say, that sounds terrible, will you go away, please? And actually, we want them to be saying, that's brilliant, that's part of the transition we all need, and we understand why we need it. And then I think the quid pro quo is, we need strong government policies and strong policies from us about, well, if you're going to host this infrastructure, what are you going to get in return? And that, I think, would unlock a lot of the sense of injustice that's currently felt about this. And I'm looking forward, hopefully, to working with the government to do this.
That sounds good. It's almost the central barrier of the transition, isn't it? I think it's that citizen understanding that there will be benefits, the system will be lower, but it's a big replacement of infrastructure. So it needs the capital, but also it needs something from consumers, and how to do that is a tricky thing.
Yeah, can I say a few
please.
words there? I think it's our biggest risk.
Yep.
There's lots of risk in the energy transition. We've spoken about some of those, supply chains, skills, etc. But if you look across the ecosystem of delivering the infrastructure we have to, I think this one stands out. I don't think climate change is yet to get a social contract. I don't think we've got over that hump. I think people are far too focused on the immediate, and we've seen the rise of energy poverty in Europe for the first time. Interest rates have been high, people are doing it tough. We're seeing that play out in some of the elections. The EU election went to the right. There's this mess in the US. So this needs work. From our perspective, there are 5 things we need to do to get this infrastructure built, and one of them is around broadening the way we define value. And I'm very interested in the investment community. Yesterday I sat over there and listened to some investors talking about impact accounting. So moving away from ESG metrics to talking about actually the impacts they have. And one of the things in the discussion there was the fair transition. How do we measure that? Yep. Is a really interesting question that's arising. But there is no transition without fair transition. We have to convince communities to accept an unprecedented and long duration infrastructure challenge that's going to disrupt them, it's going to disrupt their view shed, it's going to disrupt the way they work and live. But if we don't do that, we won't have a transition.
Yeah, so something there about investment and how that's done in the future. I wonder, because we've identified this as a key challenge, and I think how we've defined it so far is a political risk. Is there something also about showing consumers the early benefits? So something around sort of in the markets piece, how if it were easier for consumers to to get investment, to have heat pumps and solar panels on their homes so they can start getting those lower bills and start getting those flex revenues so they can actually see the benefits rather than these benefits being sort of in 30 years' time. Would that sort of pull through help with some of the community acceptance, which can then help the grid to be built out faster and sort of smooth it all along? Is there something there?
So I would say we think at the moment that you probably need a range of measures, and certainly the economics of this, and by the way, my own personal view, the climate change conferences have been amazing, and actually Dubai was particularly amazing for generating a really solid commitment. But they have been slightly light on the question of the economics and who's going to pay for all of this. And it does strike me that there's a good case that there should be some sort of public investment in enabling this somehow. We actually don't feel that public investment needs to be investing in the grid itself, for instance. You know, we have recently done a rights issue. We've just raised 7 billion actually on a rights issue 3 weeks ago. Went very smoothly. People are prepared to invest in this from an investment. Like, the investors are prepared to invest. So it's not really that's needed. I think it is something about what are we going to give consumers and the public that's going to make them feel that they're not taking all the pain today for the jam that they're not going to experience tomorrow. And there would be a range of things you could do to help that, I think.
Thank you. Lokesh, could I come to you? Before the panel, we were having an interesting discussion about the sort of range of investments that Ebert makes. And you mentioned some models that's happening in Germany where there's investment in consumer assets. So just wanted to pick up on that.
Yeah, sure. Look, if you asked me 7 years ago, would we want to kind of invest into heat pumps and rooftop PV and EV charging for consumers, I would probably say no, because one, it's subscale, and two, is the risk and return wouldn't match up. That's changed. We are now actively looking to get closer to the consumer because, as I said, we have started to realize that if we have to deliver the climate transition, it has to be actually consumer-led with investor support. So we're looking at organizations that can actually bundle these 2 or 3 technologies, which are now, fairly well understood and mature. And we can make platform investments into these organizations that can then go out and roll small infrastructure in people's homes and effectively deliver energy through a service type model. We used to do this for CNI customers, back when energy efficiency and gas CHPs used to be really popular to provide, an alternative private wire network. Now we're seeing that for heat pumps, solar PV, and EV charging for the consumers. In fact, there's an organization in Germany called NPAL that has tried to scale this and has been pretty successful. Again, successful, yes, but they're facing the same supply chain challenges that you spoke about at the moment. It's the business case adds up. It's effectively a fixed price lease contract for us, and that's how we're viewing it.
It's really interesting. Thanks, Mary.
So just to build on that, I think there is a huge kind of engagement and an excitement piece that is potentially there for the taking. I don't know if you have the same experience, but there are people in my team who I cannot get to shut up about their solar panels and their battery at home and their how they use it to charge their electric vehicle, which is brilliant. But we do have to be conscious that a lot of renewable technologies, a lot of clean technologies are about a capital investment up front, and that means we do have this fairness challenge because not everyone has the capital to invest in it. Not every consumer is able to make that investment or even has the roof space. You may not have a roof or a driveway or kind of the ability to put a battery in. So there is a gap, I think, for a lot of people to feel included in the energy transition, to feel it is a just transition. But there are some interesting models, and I think they're still relatively small and relatively they're not fully scaled. But I think that there are some exciting examples. So a group that I kind of have done some work with in a previous life was in the community energy space. So we this was Bristol Energy Cooperative. Bristol's great. Bristol's very kind of lots of alternative and kind of different thinking happening in Bristol. But one of the kind of the innovations there was about how you use community investment to deliver solar on community buildings. And the level of excitement that generates, that people feel part of something, that people feel that they might not have 5K to put a massive solar array on their roof, but they do have £50, and they can put that into something that is doing something positive that they are part of and they feel ownership of. We've got Ripple here today, and you can be part owning a wind turbine. I think this kind of engagement, this kind of positive association with climate, I think is going to be massive in terms of feeling that it's not something that's happening to you, that it's happening with you. And the more we can be part of that, and even payments for infrastructure kind of going in nearby, that the Bristol Energy Cooperative generates returns on that solar, and that is used to unlock additional projects that might not fund themselves, that might be around warmer houses or just things that the community would like and need. So it's seeing the kind of the early returns, seeing the benefits of what is going to be disruptive, what is going to be kind of uncomfortable at times, a transition. To actually see, but we're bringing everyone with us, I think is massively important. The more we can do of that, the better.
Okay, I completely agree. I think it's really interesting. So there's a big part about how do we do this. It's getting consumers and showing them the early returns so that we can so that it's consumer led. I think we are running out of time. So I think I'm just going to. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi. The likely next government has a plan to decarbonise the grid by 2030. My question is this feasible, and how?
I'm an outsider, so I might be able to say something.
Yeah, I think we're looking at...
I certainly won't comment on policy. Actually, I was quite amazed when I came to the UK. I've been in London for 2 years, based here, how well the UK electricity system has decarbonised. I think it was about a decade ago, it was around 500 grams per kilowatt hour, and I think it's down to around 150 now, roughly. That is an amazing achievement, and it's up there with the best in the world. So it's not answering your question, but I think it's saying that actually it's kind of happening. It does get harder, because you run into particularly weather events that are very difficult to estimate and predict. That's where potentially AI could help more in optimising that. Longer duration storage becomes much more important. So a whole range of things. But from an outsider's perspective, looking into the UK, I think the UK should be very proud of what it's done, actually, in its electricity system. I don't know if Julia has anything to say.
I probably ought to comment on that question, shouldn't I? So we have, as you know, we have plans that would decarbonise the electricity system operator has set out plans that would decarbonise by 2035. Obviously, in National Grid, our plans to build out the network are consistent with that at the moment. We believe that with the present structure of that plan, we are going as fast as it would be possible to go, because the supply chain issues that I've mentioned, we do have measures in place for those. We are setting up novel commercial arrangements. We do have optimism. We're also talking to Ofgem about different regulatory arrangements. We have optimism that we can deliver the plan as it stands, but trying to bring it forward in its current form, we can't see how that could be accelerated. That said, you don't have to stick with that plan if you want to deliver 2030. Right? And that plan is based on a particular assumption around where the wind power is going to be, what the demand side is going to do, how we're going to use storage, how we're going to be using digital. If you wanted to look at 2030, you could say we would have a different plan. And we are actively working. My colleague David Wright, who's our chief engineer, is on a group that the Royal Academy of Engineering is looking at this. They're going to be advising government. Sir Patrick Vallance, I don't know if people know him in the audience, he was a former chief scientific advisor to the government. So we're happy to engage in that question. And you know, we want to deliver what the public and the government want.
Can I just do a really quick fire yes or no? So I think Paul and Julie, both in terms of can we decarbonise the grid by 2035? You were both yes by 2035. Lokesh and Mike and Khan, could you do a quick yes, no? Can we do it by 2035?
Depends.
Okay.
By 2035, yes. Like it's there for the taking.
I believe so as well. You know, our company motto is, if there is a will, there is a way. So if you just put it there, I believe you guys can.
I guess I'm the only one bringing some realism. Sorry?
Can I just dig into why? What does it depend on? What are the key constraints for you?
No, I mean, I think we need one of the big four consultancy companies estimated 40 billion pounds a year up to 2050. It's an enormous amount of mobilization of capital, and it's happening, but I think it needs to happen quicker for those targets to get delivered, even some of the challenges that have been highlighted. I think from our perspective, there is still a little bit of uncertainty around some of the new changes around the REMA Act, etc., that help that slow us down a little bit. But as I said, we're all working really hard, but it depends on a variety of things coming together. It's not just us as investors, but it's the whole ecosystem that needs to work together. It's investors, lenders, and government need to come together to kind of make that change happen.
May I add something? So on the economic side of this investment, in 2020 there was 18 trillion euros sitting in banks in negative interest rates. So there is money out there, you know. It's not like there's no money. We have the money in the EU and UK system. It's about do we want to use it or not. That's the answer, right? So we have the funding right out there. So I don't think funding will be a great issue in the subject.
Okay, that really nicely brings me onto a subject that we wanted to talk about. It didn't look like there were lots of hands, so we're just going to do a bit. Oh, there are. Okay. I will come to the hands in just a few moments, but just to pick up on the finance point. So there's money out there. There's some risks around whether we can get the finance to where we need it to. So to pick up that pace and scale, what do you need as investors for us to move faster? Is it regulation? Is it political commitment? What would change it?
Stability, which is a lot to ask for, I think, in the current state. So yeah, stability and you know, for me, the UK remains very attractive as an investment destination. And even if there's short-term volatility, we're trying to work. But there aren't that many people, although the investment space might seem really large. Infrastructure in the UK or even across Europe is limited, and some of the so we've got some new investors who used to do traditional large cap private equity type deals that have now started entering infrastructure. So hopefully, even from our perspective as investment managers, there'll be a lot more people working on the problem now. And that will kind of bring some scale going forward. But historically, there's not that many people who actually have the right skills and expertise to provide confidence for that money that's sitting in the banks to get mobilized.
I think there are three things needed. You need certainty, so that's certainty on your costs, that's a supply chain issue largely, but also your revenue, so your offtakes. So that's certainty of business case. You need acceptance by stakeholders that matter, so that's social and political acceptance. And you need productivity. So you need to be able to drive the assets into the ground faster. That's kind of a proxy for switching capitalism on. If people can make money out of this, it will solve itself quickly. The problem is at the moment there's so much uncertainty and risk in there that I think investors just balk. The capital discipline process we use to allocate capital is just decelerating because of the risks and uncertainties in there. You start to deal with those Government has a role there, particularly in underwriting some of those risks. I think you switch capitalism on and it will solve it.
Sorry, I just want to add to that. I think you're absolutely right. If people make money, money gets mobilized. But then we just circle back to the question on, government as the major stakeholder, because they need to underwrite a little bit of that return to make everything work. And I think as an organization, we have a view that yes, the government has a role to play. But in some of the energy transition asset classes, I think they are commercially viable anyway, as well. So I think we need to just get going.
Yes, I just wanted to add something on that note. Obviously, electricity networks are commercially viable, right? So for our bit of the world, for us, it is about this question of being able to see the forward plan. And actually, in the last couple of years, that has become much better in the UK, and it is due to become much better again with this central strategic network plan that the UK is planning, strategic spatial energy plans, so that we can see regionally what's happening. I think if some of this, and it sounds like bureaucracy, but I think it's pretty important for unlocking certainty, and it's pretty important for planning, because we need to be lining up the investment for 10 years' time, sort of now. And I think, I think the government is definitely moving on this, and I think it's about to speed up.
Michael Kahn, do you want to come in on that, or should we go to the floor for the questions? Okay, so maybe.
Hiya. I'm just wondering, on the topic of community engagement and bringing communities along in the transition, how important are issues around kind of low energy literacy among consumers, particularly around, and then again, related to that, the sense of kind of mission and being part of the solution, so that literacy and part of the stuff.
Nice. So picking up on the whole sort of storytelling that we were talking about earlier, who would like to start on that one?
So fundamental, and interestingly, it's probably not the investors, it's probably not the technology people, it's probably not the infrastructure people that are going to be the best storytellers. It's a much wider group of people that can bring to that challenge. And I think it's a way to kind of mobilize people who are in graphic design, in copywriters that have skills that you might not immediately think this is a climate skill. Well, if you can tell a story, if you can bring people, if you can build a narrative, actually that's incredibly powerful. I'd put it probably above technology. And that's an engineer talking, so, yeah.
Julian.
Yeah, so we have a campaign going at the moment. Some people may have seen this on the tubes and various parts of social media. We have a campaign called the Great Grid Upgrade, where we're trying to explain to people that if you want a cup of tea or you want an incubator in a hospital to work, that there is something behind all of that. And it's very interesting. When we were designing that campaign, we realised that for decades, sort of consciously maybe, or perhaps unconsciously, we've been of the view that for people not to know the grid is there is a good thing, right? If we do our job well, nobody notices. But obviously now we've got to transform. I think we do need for people to think a bit harder about what underlies all these things. And I do think I completely agree with Mike, there's such an opportunity for creating excitement and engagement. And we've made a small start with this campaign, but I think it needs a whole industry-wide and government concerted effort to tell this story really well.
Yeah, I think the information has to be human. It has to be absolutely targeting what matters to people. And when we deal with projects in certain locations, one of the things we try and understand is place, the importance of place, and what that means. So the humanisation of the story, like you just mentioned, there's an emotional element to the use of electricity. It is such an impactful thing in our lives that there's that thing. But the enemy of information is disinformation and misinformation, and this needs attention, because it is so easy in this world of social media to put misinformation and disinformation into a debate, which can horribly skew things. And in a couple of countries of the world, we're seeing this. In the United States, for example, around carbon capture and storage, which is, I know, not everyone's friends, but it's an essential technology. The misinformation and disinformation is really hurting that industry. So we've just got to be careful with the yin to the yang.
Yeah, completely. Khan, did you want to come in?
Just a little example. We have a power plant in Odessa region, in Odessa, Ukraine. As you know, in Ukraine, baseload power plants were hit. So in Ukraine, they have energy loss. 4 hours a day, they don't have electricity. But in Odessa region, due to a power plant like us, wind energy power plants, they have electricity. So we have to tell people about its story, what's happening with these renewable energies, benefits of it. I watched a documentary on Deutsche Welle on YouTube. You can look at it up as well, where it says a town, they have this community talks if they want a wind power plant or not in their community. And that whole community started protesting. They said, not our community, do it for the other neighboring community. So we have to take responsibility as well. We have to tell people how necessary this transition is. So just to add.
Nice example. What's really struck me from this panel is that whilst no one is consumer focused directly in their role or their organisation, we've ended up with consumers. And we started off with the grid as a great enabler of the transition, but we've almost put the consumer and this storytelling before that. We can't do the build out, we can't do everything else, we can't get the investment in the right places unless we do that storytelling first. That's quite striking. Interesting. Any questions from the audience? Are we...
Sorry to take it away from the consumer. This first question probably for Julie. How do you envisage the increased borrowing costs affecting your ability to implement the Great Grid Upgrade? And then for the wider group, the UK government's kind of lack of policy, I would say, in supporting a green transition, does that affect our ability to keep up with global peers? If you look at China, you look at the IRA over in the United States, you look at EU policies, we're not really backing our companies to be able to achieve the same level as our global peers.
Nice question. Over to you, Julie.
So just on the specifics on borrowing costs, we're a very long-term borrower. We have very long-term assets and we have very long-term debt. We do obviously suffer, as everyone does, from short-term increases in borrowing costs, but it hasn't honestly really changed our plans. I mentioned we've just done a rights issue at the year end. We obviously plan to raise a lot more borrowing. The total value of our capital programme over 5 years as a company is 60 billion. This is more than we've ever invested in that period by a very long way. So we will be borrowing more, and we are trying to take a long-term view, to be honest, is the answer.
Does anyone else want to pick up on that one?
I won't comment on specific policy, but I will say policy is important. We do get occasionally asked to comment and assist in policy creation. Certainly in the area of energy transition, our view is that the best policy is that which thinks like an investor. So it actually becomes an enabler of capital mobilisation. And I mentioned before this idea of underwriting some of the risks that are really hard in these early stage value chains. I mean, green hydrogen is a classic example. There are some things that the government could underwrite rather than providing subsidies. So that's the kind of advice we give to governments.
Super. I think we've been told to wrap it up, so I'm going to finish there. But thank you so much to my panel. I really enjoyed that discussion. So thank you to Khan and to Mike and to Julie and to Paul and Lokesh. Thank you.